Welcome to BEFM Drama. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and I'll be joining you on the program as Dr. John Watson. Tonight, we're bringing you the final part in our adaptation of The Dancing Men, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes was initially hired by Hilton Cubitt, a Norfolk gentleman, to investigate a series of childish messages, chains of dancing stick figures, that had been appearing mysteriously around his property and terrifying his wife Elsie, an American woman with a mysterious past. Holmes managed to decode the messages, but his understanding came too late. Hilton Cubitt has been murdered and his wife Elsie gravely injured. Holmes has identified the suspect as an American gangster named Abe Slaney and has set a trap for him in his dead client's home. Holmes had finished explaining how he had decoded the dancing men and was gathering up his papers calmly when Inspector Martin, who had been listening with rapt attention, suddenly spoke.
It is a privilege to be associated with you in the handling of the case. You'll excuse me, however, if I speak frankly to you. You're only answerable to yourself, but I have to answer to my superiors. If this Abe Slaney, living in Eldridge's, is indeed the murderer, and if he has made his escape while I'm seated here, I should certainly get into serious trouble.
You need not be uneasy. He will not try to escape.
How do you know?
To run would be a confession of guilt.
Then let us go arrest him.
I expect him here any moment.
But why should he come?
Because I have written and asked him.
But this is incredible, Mr. Holmes. Why should he come because you have asked him?
Because I knew how to ask. In fact, if I am not mistaken, here's the gentleman coming up the driveway now.
A man was striding up the path towards the house. He was tall and handsome, dressed in a gray suit, with a bristling black beard and an aggressive hooked nose, flourishing a cane as he swaggered up the path. A moment later, a confident ring came at the front bell.
I think, gentlemen, that we had better take up positions behind the door. Every precaution is necessary when dealing with such a fellow. You will need your handcuffs, Inspector. You can leave the talking to me.
We waited in silence for a minute before the door opened and the man stepped in. An instant later, Holmes had the barrel of his gun pressed deeply into the flesh of the man's forehead, and Martin had snapped his handcuffs over his wrists. It was done so quickly that the fellow was helpless before he realized he'd even been attacked. He glared from one to the other of us with a pair of blazing black eyes. Then he burst into a bitter laugh.
Well, gentlemen, you got the drop on me, I guess. I'm between a rock and a hard place. I came at Mrs. Hilton Cubitt's request. Don't tell me that she helped set this trap.
Mrs. Hilton Cubitt was seriously injured and is barely clinging to life.
The man gave a hoarse cry of grief, which rang through the house.
You're crazy! It was the husband that was hurt, not her. Who would hurt little Elsie? I threatened her, sure, but I'd not have touched a hair on her pretty head. Take it back. Say she isn't hurt.
She was found badly wounded by the side of her dead husband.
He sank with a deep groan on the couch and buried his face in his handcuffed hands. For 5 minutes he was silent. Then he raised his face once more and spoke with the coldness of despair.
I have nothing to hide. If I shot the man, it's because he shot first. There's no murder in that. But I would never have hurt that woman. I tell you, there was never a man in this world who loved a woman more than I loved her. I had the right to her. She'd been pledged to me years ago. Who was this Englishman to come between us? I had the right, and I came to claim her.
She fled America when she learned what you are. What right did you have? She married a good man in England. You followed her and made her life hell in order to force her to abandon a husband she loved and respected in order to run away with you, a man she feared and hated. Gangster, murderer, you have caused the death of a nobleman and driven his wife to attempted suicide. That is your record in this business, Mr. Slaney, and you will pay dearly for it under the law.
If Elsie dies, I don't care what happens to me.
He opened one of his hands and looked at the note crumpled up in his palm before staring at Holmes with suspicion.
Now you see here, mister, you're not trying to scare me, are you? If the lady is hurt as bad as you say, who was it that wrote me this note?
I wrote it to bring you here.
You wrote it? There ain't a man on earth outside the joint that knows the secret of the dancing men. How did you come to write it?
What one man can invent, another can discover. There's a cab waiting to take you to Norwich jail, Mr. Slaney, but in the meantime you have to do some good in payment for the injuries you have wrought. Are you aware that Mrs. Hilton Cubbett is under grave suspicion of having murdered her husband, and that it was only my presence here and the knowledge I possess that has saved her from the accusation? The least that you can do for her is to make it clear to the law that she was in no way directly or indirectly responsible for his tragic end.
I ask nothing better. I guess the best case I can give is the absolute naked truth.
It is my duty to inform you that your testimony will be used against you.
I'll take that chance. First, I want you to understand that I have known Elsie since she was a girl. There were 7 of us in the gang in Chicago, and Elsie's dad was the boss. He was clever, old Patrick. He invented that writing, which passes as a child's doodle unless you have the key to it. Well, Elsie eventually learned the true side of our business. A little gambling, a little prostitution, victimless crimes, really. Though we had to ice a man or two from time to time if they get too nosy. She gave us the slip and ran all the way to London. She was engaged to me and would have married me, I think, if I'd had a different profession. As it was, she'd have nothing to do with me once she knew what I was. I only found out where she was living after her marriage to this Englishman. I wrote, but got no answer. After that, I came over, and as letters seemed useless, I made sure to put my messages where she would read them.
And so you made your way to Norfolk?
Yep, been here a month now. I lived on that farm, had a room down below, could get in and out easy every night with none the wiser. I did all I could to lure Elsie away. I knew she read the messages because she wrote an answer underneath one of them once. Then my temper got to me and I started threatening her. She sent a letter, begging me to go, saying it would break her heart if anything happened to her husband. She said she'd come down last night when he was asleep and speak to me through the window if I'd go home afterwards and leave her in peace. She came downstairs and brought money with her. She tried to bribe me. That got me mad, and I grabbed her arm and tried to pull her out the window. At that moment, the husband came running in with a revolver in his hand. Elsie had sunk down on the floor, and we were face to face. I held up my gun to scare him off, but he took a shot at me. Missed, bad luck. I'm no stranger to a gunfight, boys. He may have fired first, but I gave him one of my own at practically the same moment and dropped him. Then I ran off across the garden and heard the window shut behind me. That's God's truth, boys. Every word. I heard nothing more about it until that lad came riding up with the note that made me walk in here like a gall-derned mark to put myself in your hands.
A cab had driven up whilst the American had been talking. 2 uniformed policemen sat inside. Inspector Martin rose and touched his prisoner on the shoulder.
It is time for us to go.
Can I see Elsie first?
No, she's not conscious. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I only hope that if ever again I have an important case, I shall have the good fortune to have you by my side.
We stood at the window and watched the cab drive away. As I turned back, my eye caught the paper Slaney had tossed upon the table. It was the note with which Holmes had decoyed him.
See if you can read it, Watson. If you use the code I have explained, you'd find that it simply says, "Come here at once." I knew that it was an invitation he'd not refuse, since he couldn't imagine it had come from anyone but the lady. And so, dear Watson, we have ended by putting these dancing men to good use, when they have so often been tools of evil. I think that I fulfilled my promise, of giving you something interesting for your writing? Our train is at 3:40, and I think we might even be back in time for dinner.
One final word before we end this tale. The American, Abe Slaney, was condemned to death that winter, but his penalty was reduced to penal servitude in consideration of the fact that Hilton Cubbett had fired the first shot. Of Mrs. Hilton Cubbit, I know only that she miraculously survived her injuries, and now remains a widow, devoting her life to the welfare of the poor and to the management of her late husband's estate. The childish dancing men Hilton Cubbit first brought to the attention of Sherlock Holmes have proven to be the coded language of a ruthless group of Chicago gangsters. The messages sent by Abe Slaney, Elsie Cubbit's former fiancé, who had traced her back to England and was determined to take her back with him. Holmes cracked the code and brought the killer to justice, and the woman eventually recovered from her wounds, though without her beloved husband to comfort her. And Watson? Well, Watson was left with a dark and unusual tale to tell. We hope that you've enjoyed this production of The Dancing Men here on BEFM Drama, and that you'll join us again next week for another exciting tale from the case files of Sherlock Holmes.